Okay, let's start with the summary first. That way, if you're interested, you can skip ahead or keep watching as we go through each of the different pedals, some of their features, and we'll even take some apart. Overall, I'm personally a huge fan of the aesthetic. I love the Hammertone feeling. The pedals feel solid, they look solid. There's no plastic really to be found except for the knobs. The skirts are even, I think, aluminum or something. Pedals aren't too heavy, but they don't feel so lightweight that you would be suspectful of their quality. Inside, the build quality is really, really clean. Surface mount components, which, depending on if you're looking to mod them or repair them, might be a little bit trickier. There's little details that I really, really love. So, for example, each of the different LEDs have matching LEDs to go with the color scheme. Little touch like that I think is just wonderful. Like, there's a lot of thought went into the design of this. Top mounted jacks make it very easy to mount to a pedal board, keep your pedal board nice and clean. I could easily get 6 or 7 of these in a row if I wanted to. Some things that I think might be problematic for some people, as you toggle through some of the different settings, there's like a very abrupt halt to the effect in some of the pedals. So like reverb, for example, toggling the switches will immediately cut off the trails. Overall, the pedals aren't too noisy, but if you do have noise in your signal, in your chain, it will make the noise a little bit more obvious. The other thing is some of the switches are a little noisy. Now, so noisy that they're not usable? Absolutely not. Overall, each of the different effects have very, very wide range. Something like the chorus, for example, so like the extremes on them are quite extreme, and there's sounds that I could get out of this that I can't get out of most chorus pedals. Overall, the fuzz pedal might be the one that causes the most problems for people. Just sounds like some of the clipping in there is the signal just kind of gets lost. So best thing I could recommend is try it out yourself. Watch some of the other sample videos so you don't have to A, hear me talk, and B, you'll hear me go through some of the ranges of tonality. But overall, I'm a huge fan of the series. Despite the fact that they're made in China, it would have been nice to see them made maybe, I know we're getting into, cost at this point, and having them made in Japan or, heaven forbid, North America would make them a lot more expensive. But that being said, they're kind of priced right, and they're targeting that entry-level price. So in Canada, it's between like $99 and $119. So really, really trying to target the JHS Series 3 market or some of the Ibanez mini pedals. Overall, I like them. Glad I have them. And they're going to be fun to play around with. Okay, so we'll go through each pedal. I'll describe some of the features and give a little bit of a sample. But like I said, if you don't want to hear the talking, check out some of the other clips, but if you want to hear what kind of capabilities each one has, that's what I'm going to go through right now. So let's start with some of the drives and distortions. So first one, as you saw in the unboxing, is the Fender Hammertone distortion. So treble, bass, that's your tone knobs, and then level and gain. So again, let's take it apart. What we're going to find inside with some of these is there's optional and additional ways to kind of tweak some of the tone. So even though you got the treble and bass and level and gain on the front, there's 2 little trim pots on the inside. So not every pedal has these additional trim pots, but these 2 in particular is for, so the top one is for adjusting the mids, and the last one is for further adjustments to the tone, which is just kind of generic. So those trim pots you're not going to see in the manual, but just kind of goes through some of the things in there. So pretty standard. Treble, bass, level is the volume of the distortion effect, And gain goes from low gain overdrive to a full blown high gain distortion. So that is the distortion. Next up, we have the metal. This one is probably the one I was most dubious about. Metal pedals are hard to get a good sound out of it. This is the Fender Hammertone metal. So very similar to the Overdrive. You got a high and a low tone knob and a level and a gain. And again, it's pretty much what the instructions say. Gain adjusts gain level. Thank you, that's very helpful. And again, if we open this one up, we have similar trim pot adjustments. So the top one's for adjusting the mids and adjusting I'm assuming the amount of scoop in there. And then the bottom one's for adjusting the tone. So in one of the videos, I attempt to kind of go through it, but it's a really, really fine adjustment, so you need to be careful how you're doing that, especially with modulation effects. Choruses, for example, usually have a trim pot inside for adjusting bias and some other parts of the signal. Usually the fine-tuning is done on an oscilloscope, so if you're not careful and just start messing around with that trim pot on some modulation effects, you can end up just throwing the modulation settings out the window and just kind of make it kind of sound kind of crappy. So I think for these ones, these seem to be kind of user accessible trim pots. So if you see one, it's probably safe. But if you start looking underneath the board and see trim pots, I'd probably leave those alone. Okay, next up we have the Fender Fuzz. So a little bit of a departure here. There's only one tone knob, and then we have one for fuzz and then the level. So I'm also going to loosen this one up, but let's take a look at what the book says. Because this one, and I love this aesthetic, some of these have these little micro switches. This one has a little switch for octave. So when the octave switch is flipped up, it adds an octave up fuzz mode, providing more volume and cut. So that's what that does. Let's take it apart and see if there's any goodies inside. So again, this one has one trim pot for tone. So already, I'm liking how these ones seem to be kind of designed for the tweakers. Which also kind of goes without saying that sometimes pedals trying to be everything and anything to everybody sometimes can tend to lose their focus. I don't know if that's going to happen here. We'll have to see how they sound. But that's the fuzz. So that's the overdrive, the distortion, the fuzz, the metal, the distortion, and then last we have the overdrive. So this one is still dismantled. but we got a tone knob, level, and gain. And then this one has a pre-mid boost. So it has a separate knob just for the pre-mid boosts, which adjusts the amount of front-end mid-range boost. So that's pretty cool. Similar to the other ones, this one does have a trim pot adjustment, and that's for tone. Let's move on to the delays. I absolutely love these pedals. Love the color of blue. So here's the Fender delay pedal. So what are we looking at here? So we have time and feedback controls at the top. So one will adjust the length of the delay, and feedback will adjust how many repeats that you will get. And then we have a three-way toggle here for type. And then we have a two-way toggle here for modulation. So, what are the three types? So the three-way position, so when you flip it up, it's a digital delay. The middle is a dark analog delay. And then the bottom is a mid-range sounding analog delay. So that's pretty cool. And the modulation switch will turn the modulation on the repeats on and off. So that's all it does. So you might be asking, that's great. We can modulate the repeats or add some modulation to it. Lo and behold, on the inside, we have two trim pots. And these ones are specifically for adjusting the modulation. So the top one adjusts the modulation rate, and then the bottom one adjusts the modulation depth. So you might pick this up, turn on the modulation, and figure, this modulation just doesn't cut it for me, and not realize that inside you can actually adjust the rate of the modulation and the depth. So you can back off the depth to make it a little bit more subtle, or just add some really, really deep modulation on the repeats just to add extra layers of sound there. So that's pretty cool. Many people might not actually realize that's in there, and it's just kind of hidden. So that's the standard delay. The next up we have the space delay. So very similar controls. So it's time feedback on the top. Level is the overall volume. And then three-way toggle for pattern. And then a two-way toggle for, again, mod, which is the modulation. So the space delay, how is it different from the regular delay? So the space delay is more aimed at towards like a taped style delay. So the pattern switch, so when it's up, so basically what we're adjusting here is different styles of patterns for like a tape head or a tape style delay. And if you go all the way up, it's a quarter note delay. Middle is just as pattern delay 1, and then down is pattern delay 2. So what you'll find is like it has different types of, so like the patterns, not a ping pong, but it's like a multi-step delay kind of thing. So inside, again, we have the same two adjustments for the modulation. So this one, you can turn modulation on and off, but the modulation here is a little bit different. It's kind of more like a tape warble than a just straight up kind of modulation chorus type of effect. So it's meant to emulate a tape wobble. And again, rate and depth is how you adjust the modulation there. So those are the two delays, which leaves us to reverb next. So here's our reverb. So controls here are time and level. So time is the kind of like the time of the delay. And damp is interesting. So how would you describe damp? This one is kind of backed all the way off. The reverb trails will continue on and they sound more bright. Damp just means it's kind of like you're dampening the reverb on it. So the tails will be a little bit duller and a little bit quieter, darker, and shorter. That being said, that's not a bad thing. I actually really like the sound of the damp on here, and I find myself cranking it all the way up, and just adds a really dark, lush kind of reverb. So we got more toggles here. So we have a 3-way toggle for reverb type, and then we just have a 2-way toggle for tone. So the tone switch, simply, like when it's flipped up, will add a little bit more brightness to the reverb. What are the 3 types? So when it's switched up, it's a hall type reverb, middle is room reverb, and then down is a plate type reverb. So again, you have quite a lot of this. So far, I've found that this one is one of the most versatile pedals so far in the Hammertone range. And there's a lot of really good usable reverb in there. So whether you like long, trailing, shimmery type of reverb, short, dark, whatever, it has a lot of range. So this one, it's as you see it. So there's no additional adjustments inside. So no user accessible trim pot adjustments. It's just kind of what it is. It does what it says on the tin. All right, so now we move to last 2 pedals, which are more modulation effects. So we've got chorus. So standard controls here, the knobs, you have a depth and a rate for adjusting the chorus depth and rate. Go figure. Again, level knob. And very similar to the reverb and the delays, we have a 3-way toggle for type. And then again, a tone switch just like the reverb. So let's take a look at the 3 different types. Ooh, so up is a single voice mode, which is like a traditional analog chorus. Middle is a 2-voice mode, which adds another voice with more delay and modulation. And then down is a 4-voice mode, which adds 2 more voices with additional delay. So base delay times for the 4 delays are 14 milliseconds, 23 milliseconds, 29 milliseconds, and 35 milliseconds. So as chorus voices are added, pedal automatically drops the level of the other voices so the volume stays the same. So that's kind of cool. We'll see how that one sounds in a second. And again, the tone switch, when you engage it, kind of rolls off some of the higher frequencies and makes it a little bit darker. Again, no user adjustable components inside. It's just kind of what it is on the tin. And last but not least is our good friend, insert word here, Flanger, however you want to call it. So what do we have? So like the 3 knobs here, manual, which I'll explain in a minute, rate, and then depth. We have a 3-way toggle here called res, and then we have a 2-way toggle for type. So this one probably requires the most amount of explanation, but again, is one of the most versatile pedals in this line. No trim pot adjustments inside. All the modulation effects are just kind of set up the way that they should be, probably because they're programmed. So what do we have? So the res switch is a resonance switch and adjusts the amount of feedback or resonance. So making more harmonic sweeps more apparent, and hence the flanging effect more intense. So light resonance will do a more chorus effect. Heavy resonance will provide a stronger whoosh. So heavy is up, middle is medium, and down is light. The type switch adjusts the feedback polarity. So when it's up, it's a positive polarity, which adds harmonics, even more so with heavier resonance switch settings. And down is negative polarity, which removes all the harmonics. So then the other thing too is the manual control knob is really affecting the time of the flanging effect. So, how do they sound? Let's take a listen, but one thing that I've noticed across all of these pedals is that the nature of them is when you are adjusting some of the settings, there is a quite abrupt stopping of the effect. So if you're looking for a pedal that you want to quickly keep the tails or trails on the effect, switching it on and off, switching it off, you will lose the effect. And then even for something like the reverb, you'll hear this in the demo. If you strike a note or a chord, let it ring out, and then adjust the type, it just stops and then resets. So, little unfortunate. I know a lot of pedals now are coming with optional toggles or switches to keep tails on. This one doesn't seem to have that, so just something to be aware of. The second thing is overall, the effects sound really good. I like them. There's a lot of versatility in the adjusting of them, lots of wide range in each of them, really. But one thing that I've noticed is if you do have a noisy setup, so going through single coils into a bit of a noisy amp, really turning up the level will, I don't want to say they're noisy pedals, but it will increase the noise. It'll amplify that noise, which I guess is to be expected, but I would not classify these as the most quietest pedals. That being said, all 100% usable, and they all sound really, really good. And the noise so far for me has not been an issue. It's just some of the guitars that I was using were noticeably noisy guitars, and it just made the noise more apparent. Okay, let's see how they sound.